when Camille, who is a wonderful, wonderful partner in this program, as well as in her new role for the university, set out, some topics that perhaps we might want to present on, this was the first one that popped in my brain. We're going to spend about 30 minutes tonight just walking through this process because I definitely think it is an understated portion of the career process, the interview process. And having a really good reference and relationship with your professional and sometimes even personal references is very, very beneficial. But like my students, if any of them were brave enough to speak tonight, would tell you, I have a process for everything. And so I think it's really important that we take some time to prep and plan and what I call really recruit a true reference as part of our portfolio, as part of our professional portfolio experience when we're applying to positions or to new opportunities, even to furthering our education, graduate schools, and things of that sort. So for tonight's agenda, I am going to be walking you through a activity that I think is super fun. It is on your own. So if you are, as I tell my students, a paper and pen type of person, you may want to grab a paper and pen. Obviously, we're all on webinar, so if you want to open up a Microsoft Word document or something along those lines, that will be all you need for the activity. And then I'm going to walk you through some steps of how to actually tactically create a piece, a resume, a portfolio piece that includes your references, so that when a recruiter or hiring manager, hopefully you're getting to that place in the process, asks for your references, you have something that's beautifully formatted and that is able to either be emailed or handed to that individual. Camille did ask, and I'm sorry, I launched right into my agenda, me to share a little bit about myself. So I have been teaching in this program for about 6 years. I can't even believe that. On and off, obviously, I did teach online throughout COVID. I do prefer our classroom/hybrid experience, as many of my students will tell you. I am fairly animated in my approach, and I'm also an open book. So my day job is running the operations division for a financial services company. So I conduct all of my own interviews. I am very, very passionate about the recruiting process. I've done college recruiting as well as run the internship program at our firm. So lots and lots of experience, really good experiences, and maybe opportunities and stories that I like to provide my students for enhancement or improvement that they could do throughout the process, because it is, as I again tell my students, sometimes more work to get the job than you may actually be responsible for in the job. So putting all this together up front is super, super beneficial. All right, so if you are able to, what I'd love for you to do is grab that either piece of paper, so paper and pen, or again, a Microsoft Word document or notepad, whatever you feel comfortable with. And I'm going to walk you through a brief activity. So I did give my students a little bit of a preview on this activity last week, but I think it's super beneficial before we go about identifying references or limiting ourselves to who really pops into our brain if someone were to ask us, hey, can you give me 3 names? Can you just give me 3 professional references? To review your network. And what is your network? Your network can go as far and as deep as your life experiences. So for many of you, you may have a very robust work history or work experience. For some of our younger students, it may be more clubs, organizations, possibly places that they've lived. So we're going to take about 5 minutes and we're going to do one of my favorite things, which is just to kind of data dump what you can think through. Okay, so when we do this memory jogger, I want you to think sort of categories of individuals, of people you have met throughout your life experiences. Okay, and I'll walk you through. I have 5 categories up on the slide. If you want to categorize them, or I had a really brief kind of worksheet that I work through that just really basically has these buckets out there. I want you to write down for your personal experience, or type up for your personal experience, anyone who pops into your brain that maybe hasn't in a while. This does not necessarily have to be that dialed down person that you're ultimately going to choose for your reference, but it's a really good experience to think through. Hey, I haven't thought of that person in a while. I wonder what they're up to. And also expand that network potentially at the same time, possibly through social media, possibly professionally through LinkedIn, which I know I spoke with my students about last week. So here are our 5 buckets. The first is our family background. So this is things like the places that we've lived, family, friends, maybe our parents, grandparents, loved ones, sisters, brothers, their places of work, folks that we've seen at family gatherings throughout the years, picnics, barbecues. We're coming up on holiday season, okay? So I want you to just take about 2 minutes to write down anyone you could think of that would fit into this family background bucket. And since I gave the prompt, I am going to move my slide down just so I could see all your faces for 2 seconds, because I think the shared view is like a little bit. So 2 minutes, just write down anybody you could think of. It could be someone you haven't thought of in forever, or it could be someone you see every day. But people fit into that family background bucket. Okay, our second category of individuals is going to come from your educational background. Now, that is just not limited to the institutions maybe that you've attended, but really expand that out. Classmates, potentially professors, maybe someone who was the preceptor of an organization that you were a part of. Who are the people from your educational world, your educational bucket? Perhaps you got an associate's degree before starting at Post. Who are those folks that you could truly think through, I haven't called upon that person in so long. I sat next to that person in my economics class for 16 weeks, and I haven't thought about them in forever. Think through the folks from your educational background. I know for me recently, I had a personal experience where I actually saw people that I had not seen since I was in elementary school. And we were in such a close-knit group, but I hadn't thought about some of those individuals in years. And now to be able to see where they are professionally, and what part of the network that they might be a part of, it was really, really eye-opening as I speak to students about this topic, and then really to think through some of those people from even the early days of my education. So 2 minutes again on the clock. Think through some folks from your educational background. Again, classmates, teachers, professors, principals, coaches, all those folks through the years that you can think through your educational background. Okay, we'll give about 30 more seconds on that one. I do want to give a brief commercial about this. This is an ongoing activity, right? So I think my students are probably ruminating over all the things that I say throughout, but I can never say there's a final version, right, of anything. We're really always updating, modifying, tweaking, making sure that it fits the opportunity. The same thing goes for your network. So this is sort of a mini memory jogger activity, but certainly don't give yourself a hard time if you didn't remember somebody in the 2 minutes I gave you in one of these categories.
When you say like a student, you mean like someone, even if we never really talk to them, like what do you mean, like something you remember about them? Like, do you remember like what they were going for or something?
Yeah, somebody you might remember from a class experience. I would probably say if you never spoke to them or had a face-to-face conversation with them, that it might not be somebody you consider as part of your network. But certainly somebody who was a classmate or maybe was a shared experience with you, maybe major-wise that you saw in multiple classes, you would possibly include them as well. Okay, the next category is going to be your occupational background. So all the places that you've worked, whether they be internships, part-time jobs, summer camps, or your career that was, your lifetime career. All the folks you can remember working with, and you would kind of say to yourself, well, where are they now? What company might they be with? What organization might they be with? If they were a member of perhaps one of our classes and we are a criminal justice major, what police department potentially are they with? Homeland Security, my Homeland Security majors. Do we have people in EMS programs and things of that sort? So anybody you can possibly think of is going to go into that bucket from your occupational background. So again, I'll give you about 2 minutes for that. Okay, about 30 more seconds there. Okay. And then our last two buckets, for the purposes of tonight's activity, I'm going to kind of put together. So we have our hobbies and interests, and then potentially professional clubs or teams that we were a part of throughout. Again, this is our whole lifetime, right? So it could be part of our college experience, or it could be part of high school, maybe even something that we did from a club perspective. But anybody you could think of from any of these hobbies or interest groups. When I think of this category, I think about folks that you may have taken an art class with, maybe somebody that you volunteered with, maybe you play club softball or soccer, maybe you're in a knitting club or a reading group. who are some of those folks that maybe, again, haven't really thought of in a while, but had a ton in common with, and maybe want to know what they're up to these days. So take about 2 minutes to think through some of those maybe outside work or the classroom experiences. And who are some of those folks that you would ultimately bring to mind? Okay, 30 more seconds on this. Okay. So hopefully from this activity, you've come up with a bunch of folks that maybe you haven't thought of in a while, but ultimately, really, you've expanded your mindset. So I do this activity with students from two approaches. The first is we need to put the time and attention that it really takes to cultivate the right references and really put the work in to expand our network. So what I'd love for you to do is just take a last minute for yourself, because as everything in career development, it is all self-reflection first. And I'd love for you to just circle, star, underline, highlight if you use the computer, 1 to 2 people that maybe you haven't thought about in a while, and you think it might be beneficial to reach out to this individual. They may or may not be your top billed reference as a result of this particular activity, but they are a part of that expanded network. And this is going to help your mindset to sort of shift to who do I know? And also, who knows me? Because that's going to be our next portion of this presentation. That's going to be our next component of really having the reference understand what you're looking to accomplish. So just take that last minute. Would love for you to just circle, star. It doesn't matter if they're from the same bucket, if they're from across the map. 1 to 2 names that you're really going to reach out to and say, hey, I need to know where this person's at, and hopefully they can expand my network. If you think they'd make a great reference, that's phenomenal as well. But for the purposes of kind of closing this one up, just those 1 to 2 names. And again, this is for your personal experience, so there's no need to share with the large group or anything like that.
Professor, I had a question for you.
Sure.
So when I was doing the state police proceeding and I was getting all my references together, they're pretty strict about what references for what and, certain places. And as an input, I guess not really a question, more of an input. I actually used one of my old professors who was a chief of police who actually was allowing me to network with people that would qualify. Like I said, there has to be certain references like neighbors and certain
Yeah.
job descriptions and stuff. So come to find out, one of my neighbors is actually a DEA agent who was the boss, who's the chief of police is his boss. So
Wow.
the neighbor I needed was also a reference because I had to have a neighbor. I had to have
Yeah.
a reference of a certain caliber. And then also that chief of police kind of networked me to different ones that I didn't even realize I had access to, i.e. my neighbor who I needed.
That's awesome. That's such
Yeah.
a great story. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely.
when I think of family background, yeah, my brain immediately goes to my block that I grew up on,
Right.
and the four houses, right? And you know, I stay in touch with one of those people, but you know, my mom stays in touch with a bunch of them. And what are they up to? Are they very involved in our town, right? If you're looking for a local job, we talk about working for the difference between a large company or a municipality or having a state job, right?
Right.
Where are those people? Are they in a school district that you're interested in for my education students? That's a great first person scenario. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, sometimes your best references are right under your nose and you don't even realize it. Like a job like that, the guy's not gonna broadcast that type of
You
a
got
job.
it.
So I
You
mean, you're really
got
not
it.
gonna know until you network. That's why sometimes college is worth its weight in gold. Not even simply for the actual book smarts of it, but the networking that you do. Because, for example, my buddy who had a business finance degree, not even so much because of the degree obtained and where he attained it from, the professors he had allowed him to build a clientele and network the jobs. Now, I mean, he started out making six figures with like $30,000 bonuses every 6 months. So, and that was based off his connections. So connections really is who you know, not what you know, really.
Yeah.
True.
Yes. And that's actually a really great point too, not to go too far offside, but this type of activity for all of you who may be getting into some type of sales role, to do a memory jogger like this and the who you know and who you might be able to approach with a career like, let's say, financial services, or you're going to be opening up a boutique or something like that. The understanding of doing this memory jogger and the who you know can be extremely impactful. But thank you again for sharing that story. That's really awesome.
No problem.
Okay. So hopefully each of you have 1 to 2 names, again, of folks that you may be comfortable reaching out to, expanding that network. But you may have also arrived through doing this activity at some folks that really, they came to mind immediately. They know you very well. They know you from a very specific experience, or again, club or organization from a very specific job, or they've known you your whole life, okay? So when we recommend what information is truly requested from a logistical standpoint for a reference, you're usually going to be working with a one-page document. And I will show you actually a annotated version of my own reference sheet. But they're going to be requesting some pretty specific information. And you should be listing each reference with the following information. So you're always going to want to include their name. You're going to want to include their current job and position, okay? And their current company. This is very essential because we are referencing the current situation of that individual, even if we knew them from a past job or organization or experience. And you'll see further on down, we do delineate that. We're also going to want to include a phone number and an email address. And we're going to get to where you get that information in a slide to come, because these are really important pieces of data that you do not want to take for granted, and you don't want to assume that what you have is correct. Okay? And then the last piece is this frame of reference for your reference. So not to use the word redundantly, but to use it in 2 different ways. The reader has a certain reason why they may care about this reference, their frame of reference, okay? So it's really impactful if you can come up with 1 sentence explaining how you know, where you worked, how you came into contact with this person, where you did that, when, and for how long, okay? It can be extremely impactful if you can speak to what they may be able to talk about with regard to you as well. So I'll pause there, let that kind of ruminate. Does anyone have any questions about the information that should be included for a reference? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the formatting. So if you've ever taken one of my classes, you know that formatting is extremely important to me. I like everything to be determined and have a format and a font that kind of all matches. I am an old school recruiter, so I will print out your resume, print out your cover letter. Again, not all recruiters will do that, but I find it to be very impactful if your top line information, so you'll see up there, I have my Amelia B. Nathanson, my cell phone, my email address, matches the font and the format of my resume, okay? That's because typically your references are going to come at a different place in the process. And so if I'm a recruiter and I can easily see, okay, Amelia's resume matches Amelia's references and I can put those together, it looks very professional. If I'm presenting them all together, it looks very professional. It really just helps to accomplish that portfolio aspect of having a reference sheet. Okay, so I like to say match your resume and cover letter formatting when all possible. And then the last piece is you want it to be very clear, very easy to read. So you'll see up here, I actually have two individuals. Their contact information is grayed out, but these are two people that I would absolutely still to this day use as references. And they are folks that I've kept in contact through the years. And we're going to kind of get to the importance of that. So this is really how I recommend a reference sheet. Of course, you would also include, I didn't for the on purpose of this dialogue, include how they know me because I'm going to talk through that. But I would also, after their email address, include that one line of when I worked with them and what experience. So any questions on overall formatting? Okay. All right. And so the last piece, besides your sort of introspection, right, the really important part, your self thought, is really setting yourself up for success with these references. So again, you could have come up with 15, 20 names in that memory jogger and immediately said, I have 3 references that without a doubt would be great, would say phenomenal things about me. And that's wonderful. For some of you, it might take a little bit more digging and it may take a little bit more of that memory jog to really arrive at 3. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that students tend to come to me with is, Professor, I don't really have a lot of experience. Okay, well, they didn't all have to be your supervisor. They could have been your peers, right? And digging in a little bit deeper. But once you've arrived on those 3 names, there are very, very essential steps to coordinating with these references. And we're going to walk through those steps tonight. The first is you must ask them to be a reference. I should not take for granted that Natalie Mayo, the Associate Director of Student Development at St. John's University, who is one of my very good friends and was my supervisor for several years, is still up for the challenge after working with me 12 years ago of being my reference, okay? Now, most folks, they will say yes, right? You can kind of massage the process, but you really need to ask their permission. You need to say, I'm applying for graduate school. I'm applying currently for a change of career. I'm applying for a new role. Is it okay if I still list you as a reference or if I list you as a reference if you've never done this before? It is super essential that you get that individual's buy-in to be your reference. And they have some sort of semblance of when they may get a call or an email from recruiters. Now, we all know, not a perfect process, but having that bug in their ear, letting them know, hey, I'm out in the market again, gonna use your name, is really, really important for setting yourself up for success. The second piece The second rule, and again, if my students are listening, they'll know my rules, is we need to obtain what is their current best contact information. Do they want to list their employment email address, like I have for both Natalie and Michelle on mine? Or would they prefer to only be contacted personally at a personal email address? Does the email address that you still have for that individual, is it still relevant? Is that not their personal email address at all anymore? Do they even check that? Okay. So if a potential opportunity recruiter is going to be reaching out by email, the last thing you want is that to go ignored just for lack of transparency, for lack of communication. And the same would go for phone number. Now, most people would say, everybody's got a cell phone, right? It's always going to be a cell phone. Perhaps it's not. There are certain individuals who they don't answer their cell phone after hours. And if a recruiter happens to be somebody who's making calls at 5:30, 6 o'clock, they may miss that, right? They may be somebody who says, only give my desk phone, only give my my work phone. You know, I'm only going to be available during certain hours. You want to set that contact up for success. And so you want to ask them, A, for permission, B, for what's really the best way to get you these days. And then lastly, a brief discussion of the opportunity. What is it that you're applying for so that they have that, again, frame of reference as to what they should be speaking about, okay? So if I'm applying for brand new jobs, right, I decide I'm going to leave my career in financial services and I'm going to go, into retail. I'm going to want to tell Michelle and Natalie, hey, you're going to want to speak to a few different of my skill sets than you may have known me in financial services or in administrative type of functionality. Similarly, if you are recording references for an opportunity like graduate school, right, or applying to a bigger or greater program, that's a very different recommendation or reference than for a job opportunity. Would we all agree with that? So really just a brief discussion, an overview, possibly even send them the job description if you have it, or a link to it. Really get into those details, that meat of the opportunity to set yourself up for success. Okay. Now, the second piece I have on this slide is very, very timely to, again, the reference sheet that I showed you for logistical purposes, right, for how to set it up. But we need to, from time to time, determine if our references are still relevant. So first, and we alluded to this earlier, is the opportunity still something they can speak to for me? Are you still able to get in touch with that person on an ongoing basis, right? They could be the best reference in the world and really know you fantastically, but they could be out in the field all day long, right? They're just not a good person to be able to get in touch with in their current situation. Okay. And so the next piece is, how do you pivot, right? If you have those three references locked and loaded, and you're somebody who's on this call who's worked for many years or what have you, say, my references are rock solid, Professor Nathanson, I don't need to go anywhere else. And then you realize after doing this activity, hey, maybe there might be better or different references I could be reaching out to. How do you pivot? How do you have that conversation very quickly? And get that reference piece updated, number one, from a logistical perspective, but also how do you have those conversations to make sure that the opportunity is very timely with those individuals. Okay, so I am going to minimize my screen now so I can look at all your shining faces. And we just covered a lot. So I love to do sessions like this because I love the self introspection piece of it. And hopefully some of you were able to take some of those pieces away. But also we always pivot to that logistical portion of our program. So who has questions about what, or even a scenario you'd love to share where you say, hey, I would have a difficult time having this conversation. How do I position it? How do I recruit that reference?
It may be hard though to find that old reference because you might not have their contact information.
Yep.
But I I was also thinking if like you were to reach out for someone that you may know like their social media or something and you've never really spoken to them, maybe have one encounter, like wouldn't that be they think that's kind of weird, like out of the blue, like
So let's
someone
go, and Alicia is one of my students. So let's go back to one of our tips that we talked about last week. We may want to do a connection on LinkedIn first, potentially, and then send maybe a message to them. Hey, I see you're with XYZ company, or you were in my CTC class and we were both human services majors, wondering if you've heard of any opportunities out there, or you'd be, willing to maybe meet up and become a reference, right? That's another focus for, some of our students say, hey, my network's kind of small, not really sure, like I'm not really that outgoing in my classes, like what do I do next? That is a very benign way to, again, expand that network out, which has so many benefits, right? As we've talked through with LinkedIn, but also be able to have those one-on-one conversations in a much less pressured way by LinkedIn messaging and things of that sort. Did anyone come away with somebody that they're definitely going to reach out to now as a result of this? Sometimes you got to dig deep. You got to dig deep into those people that you knew, people I haven't thought of in a long time.
Amelia, can you talk about how you suggest students reach out to these references via email, phone, LinkedIn? What do you suggest?
Very good question. So I would say if it's someone that is super professional in nature, right? So I kind of breeze through this piece of it. We always talk about, 3 professional references, but understanding that at this point in life, that professional, it takes on kind of a different definition, right? So long as the person can speak to you in a professional scenario, they don't have to be a corporate person that you had a professional experience with, right? They can come from those different buckets, as long as they can speak to that nature. So I would definitely say if you've lost touch with that individual and you see that they have a LinkedIn, I would absolutely connect with them on LinkedIn, and that should be that first foray into getting back into their world. Maybe exchange a message, ask for permission in that way. If they are more of a, let's call it personal professional reference, someone where you do still have their cell phone number or their email address, I would reach out to them that way. It's a much more personal experience, and they're much more likely to say yes to that thought of being recruited as your reference, if you reach out to them in that way. And then the last piece is, don't be afraid to use your other connections to get to that connection. So for example, somebody who popped into my head, actually, as I was just speaking with all of you, is we have a very close family friend. She's been at many of our family functions, who is super ingrained in our local town, like politics, or she's on our town council and things like that. I haven't thought of her in a professional capacity, but she would make a phenomenal reference for me in certain worlds or realms. She's just not someone who pops into my brain, on an ongoing basis. But if I wanted to reach out to her, I might reach out to her through my mom, right? My mom does speak with her more frequently. She knows me very well and for a very long time, but to get that initial connection back and rolling, And so you don't feel awkward necessarily calling that individual out of the blue. For you, that mean a brother or a sister, or a former coworker that has somebody in their circle as well. So I think different approaches depending on the scenario. Anyone else? All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up my content for tonight. I hope you all found at least the memory jogger to be interesting or helpful. Watch tonight, you'll all be saying like, "Oh, that person! Oh, that person!" And again, I mentioned this earlier. Nothing in your career world should ever stay stagnant, right? Revisit this activity. Revisit your references. As you would your cover letter, your resume. This is a part of your professional portfolio. And depending on the opportunity, you may have different references for those different areas. So keep that in mind as well, that modifiable thought process in the background. Camille, were you hoping I touched on anything else?
No, I am just putting my email in the chat, and then I'm going to say thank you so much, Professor Nathanson, for this wonderful webinar. It's been so informative. I certainly took away my full list of people that I haven't spoken about thought about in a very long time. So I think this has been fantastic. I'm sure everyone here enjoyed it, and I'm sure that all those who will be watching it in the future will enjoy it. I did put my email in the chat in case you would like to reach out to me in career services. I am located on campus in the building you see behind me in my background, North 107. However, if you are an online student and not in the state of Connecticut, you certainly can reach out to me as well. We are here for our online as well as main campus students, and I look forward to hearing from you. I wish you all the best. And once again, thank you, Professor Nathanson, for this great presentation.